So I froze there, apparently. Looks like I did at any rate, which is why I backed out of the video. And so where I left off was that if the person who makes the decision doesn't get the positive economic profit, they're not going to have an incentive to act on that information. And if the person who makes the negative economic profit engages in a venture that destroys value, isn't on the hook for that amount, then they also will get the information that they are destroying value, but they're not going to have the incentive to effectively act on that information. So unless there's some other argument going on, we want the person who is organizing the resources, who is making the decision, who is taking the risk, we want them to bear either the cost of negative economic profit or get the benefits of positive economic profit. We want them to get the signal and not just get the information contained in the signal of profit, but have an incentive to act on it appropriately. So this is what we call entrepreneurs and people who own businesses. Oftentimes what we will call them is the residual claimant. In other words, the person who claims whatever is left over after the other factors of production have been paid. Now, as I've already mentioned, we can mess with this system. We could change the property rights. So you'll notice these things are interrelated. We could change the property rights so that the residual claimant isn't the entrepreneur. In that case, we are probably going to be messing. Again, there might be reasons to do this. There might be counterbalancing things. This is just like saying there may be reasons we should not permit the sale of children. Right? There may be things that aren't on our graph. This is the same thing. There may be reasons to attenuate, to weaken this residual claimancy. But as a baseline, my expectation is that if we do things that weaken or attenuate this residual claimancy, we are going to have individuals be less responsive when there are opportunities to generate value, and that they will react and leave and stop destroying value less quickly when they're making negative economic profit. So, as we've talked about, entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs are people who are alert to profit opportunities and, generally speaking, willing to take a risk on them. In other words, they're also the residual claimant because they think they see opportunities that other people don't see. They're the ones who take into account all of the relevant factors and have the authority to decide. Now, it turns out, so hopefully you get some sense here. Now, before we get too far, I'm just going to go ahead and, so hopefully you see that this is, again, profit is part of our communication system, our coordination mechanism. And so let me see now if I can augment our normal supply and demand schedule now to incorporate these entrepreneurs more explicitly and formally. So if nothing is intervening, we would expect to be at this price and this quantity. Where are entrepreneurs in here? Well, let me go ahead and see if I can put them into our framework. This person's trying to read a book, by the way. My poor attempt. This is actually about as far as we can get in terms of putting our entrepreneurs into our model formally. We assume that they're there. They are actually essential for supply and demand to work effectively. If we don't have entrepreneurs, we could have a demand, but we might not have a supply because nobody is alert to the fact that people want new, different, variegated products. Now, this is somewhat trite, but I think it's important to realize that entrepreneurship is essential for markets to function the way we think they function. And entrepreneurship, in order for that to be socially productive, you need to have the residual claimant actually get the residual. Now, we've been dealing with entrepreneurs really in the background throughout this, because if you think back to when I said, let's remember, if the price was down here, I'll just go ahead and erase some of these here. If this was the price, this would be the quantity supplied and this would be the quantity demanded. What happens next in this situation? Well, everybody, when we first went through this, you all said, well, of course, the merchants are going to bring more to the market and charge more. And I was trying to push back and say, well, maybe not. How do you know that they're going to do that? We are used to that happening, but why can we reasonably expect that I never have to go to a shopkeeper, or very seldom do I ever have to go to a shopkeeper and say, hey, if you would bring another one of these things to Billings, I'd pay you more money. Or if you would bring some of this stuff to Billings, I would pay you more money, right? Why don't we usually, why almost never do we ever have to do that? And the answer is entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs in an entrepreneurial environment with people who are alert to profit opportunities and willing to take risks, those entrepreneurs are the ones, maybe I'll go ahead and put this entrepreneur back in here, who is, in effect, going to push the price up. They're saying, right? And you don't actually usually have to do this. You understand that there's other people who are alert to these opportunities. And that's a function of living in an entrepreneurial system, not just with an entrepreneurial system. My experience in West Africa and Togo, and I think if you talk with anybody from most places around the world, is that people, generally speaking, particularly in poor countries, are trying to find a way to make more money, to try and make some positive economic profit so that they can feed their families, so that they don't go hungry, so that they maybe can educate their kids, etc. So in Togo, it wasn't like people weren't entrepreneurial. People were quite entrepreneurial. The issue there was property rights. So it turns out we can actually divert entrepreneurial vigor and entrepreneurial energy into socially destructive ends rather than productive ends, and that's going to depend on the rules that are in place. The key at this point here, again, for those who are curious about that and want to talk more about that, I'm happy to do that. We'll probably have a chance to talk a little bit more about that this term. I will say that in macroeconomics and principles of macro, that's something we definitely spend a lot more time on, is which rules matter and in what way do they matter. So we have these entrepreneurs here, which is why we generally don't go to shopkeepers and say, hey, what about this? Because those shopkeepers have anticipated our needs, have anticipated our wishes, and are already engaged in adjusting for them. This is, of course, part of the reason why the system of prices, profit, and property rights, the three in conjunction, is why I don't tell my shopkeeper, aside from when there's an epidemic going on, I don't tell my shopkeeper when I'm going to show up or what I'm going to want, and if they don't have it, I get pissed off. People right now are getting pissed off. They go into the grocery store and they're not finding any beans on the shelves. Now, most of them are kind of pretty chill about it, but I'm guessing that some people are starting to get a little stroppy about it. Why? Because they've gotten used to the system working so well. This system of discovery, this system of communication, this system of prices, profit, and property rights. So entrepreneurs are important. Residual claimancy is important. Profit is important. Here's something interesting, or of course something I find interesting. And this is that you can't make positive economic profit on things that everybody else knows. Why not? Well, right now, do you think that people understand that there's a market and a value for masks and hand sanitizer? Sure. Turns out I'm pretty sure that as soon as this information about the epidemic came out, and if you think back to the exam, there was a question on there, that price of hand sanitizer shot through the roof very quickly, and some people made a lot of money. Why? Because they were the first movers. They correctly anticipated the future, that this virus was going to spread more widely than many people thought. And they took action in advance. Now, what happened as a result of that? As a result of them stockpiling and trying to buy things in the present. Now, you may, what's happening? We think about the present. In effect, these entrepreneurs, and I've forgotten the name of the person, but these entrepreneurs were in effect saying, you know what, I have a bunch of information that maybe in the future, what's going to happen is that because of greater benefit from having hand sanitizer as a result of this virus, what's going to happen? Demand is going to increase. And as a result of disruptions because of people staying home, etc., and people getting sick, it also turns out that there's almost certainly going to be higher opportunity costs. So somebody said, ooh, I think I know this. Now, if everybody had known this, this would have happened in the present. But it takes a little while, and most of us didn't run out immediately upon hearing that this outbreak had happened, had been established in Wuhan in Hubei province. Most of us didn't rush out and buy a bunch of hand sanitizer. So what actually was the case? Well, these people, in effect, bought up a bunch of hand sanitizer. And what that meant at the time that people were very upset about was they were paying more money and the quantity of hand sanitizer in private hands was decreasing. Of course, then what were these people doing? Was they were holding on to this and sticking this hand sanitizer in a storage locker so that they could sell it in the future, at which point that would be an increase in supply. Now, adjusting for the cost of storage and the cost of acquisition, etc., we would expect that the result of these speculators, of these entrepreneurs, was that the price in the present was going to go up, and the quantity in the present was going to go down. But in the future, the price was lower than it otherwise would be, and there would be a greater quantity in the future. Now, it turns out some of those speculators and entrepreneurs made some money off this. But as soon as everybody knew that this, or had an expectation that this virus was going to be a serious issue, you can't make money buying hand sanitizer anymore. And that's not because Amazon has shut down price gougers. It's because basically everybody knows that the price is, all of that information has been captured or encapsulated in part of our communication system, prices here. Remember, prices communicate a huge amount of information and provide incentives to act on that information. So some other examples that you can't make money on is land, right? You can make money on land if you think you have a vision that other people don't have. But I hear people here say, look, I have a good friend of mine who bought a house. He and his wife bought a house recently, and they said, look, this is great because you know what? They're not making more land in Billings, right? And the population's growing, and I know enough economics to know that the price will probably go up. Assuming we have a perfectly inelastic supply schedule, which we don't. But do you think that you could make positive economic profit? You might be able to make money. You might be able to make positive accounting profit. But do you think you could make positive economic profit by buying land out to the west of Billings? I think that land, people have already started bidding on it, right? People understand that Billings is going to keep growing, and a lot of it's going to keep growing out towards the west end. And so that information is then encapsulated into the current price. And so if you were to buy land at the present, based on that information, not based on some other vision, but based on that information, I don't think, unless you just got lucky because something weird happened, you wouldn't be able to make positive economic profit. Again, you can probably make some positive accounting profit, but you can't make positive economic profit. Right? So here's an interesting. Hopefully, you'll have some questions on this on Monday. But this is my claim that you can't make you can't make economic profit. And when I say profit, I'm going to assume, unless I say otherwise, we're talking about economic profit. So, should you invest in the most profitable corporations? It's a tough call, right? Apple's pretty profitable even now. It has a huge cash reserve. Amazon, I'm not sure Amazon is profitable, but it's certainly the stock price is going up. Should you invest in the most profitable companies? And the answer is no. You shouldn't invest in the most profitable corporations if other people believes that they're profitable. Now, if other people believe that those most profitable corporations are not profitable, in other words, you have information that other people don't have, then absolutely. Absolutely. This, by the way, is not saying that you can't make a living trading in or engaging in things that other people don't know, or that everybody knows. You can't, right? You can make a living doing that. I'm not sure that I'm particularly entrepreneurial in my teaching. I try and be, but not so much profit opportunities. That's not really my major driver, although maybe I will be more alert to that in future. But part of the reason for that is because I think that most, right, it's not like I'm giving you information about economics that is new or that is unique to me. There's some aspects of my teaching style, my teaching techniques that are, I think. But generally speaking, I make a decent living doing my teaching. But I wouldn't say I make positive economic profit. I make accounting profit, but I'm basically trading on things that most other people know. And so that those are already factored into things. Again, hopefully you all, as you watch these, are jotting down questions or thoughts that you'd like clarification on that maybe we can pick up in our next class and start talking about. Part of the key here is that the entrepreneur is an important, if not a critical, essential part of the coordination process that we take for granted. Right? We've already talked about entrepreneurship with arbitrage. Arbitrage being correcting errors and providing information, right? Taking advantage of price differentials across geography. Now, here's something I would note. There can be price differentials across space. And if everybody knows them, knows that those price differentials are there, you probably can't make any positive economic profit on that. So when I went to Togo in West Africa, it turned out in the north, in the Savannahs region where I was living, we grew a lot, I didn't, but people grew a lot of watermelons. The climate was really good for watermelons. Turns out in the south, it was too wet, basically, I think. And so the watermelons didn't grow very well. So it turns out the price for watermelons in the north of the country during watermelon season was very, very low. It was almost like zucchini. People couldn't give them away. I'd spend days just having watermelon, just eating lots and lots of watermelon. We'd have watermelon for dinner, eat a whole watermelon. It was good until you, right, diminishing marginal returns, got a little tired of watermelon, but really good watermelon. So the Peace Corps administration said to me, because I was there in the Peace Corps, the Peace Corps administration said, you're a small business development volunteer. You know what you really should do is you should go to the north of the country and convince people in the north, right? Tell them about this price differential between watermelons in the north and watermelons in the south, because watermelons in the south are selling for quite a bit. Watermelons in the north are dirt cheap. You know, people could make some real money. And that's not our goal, but our goal is to help this country develop and help people feed their families and help people develop their skills and grow. And so them making money, particularly for me as a small business development volunteer, that's what I should do. So I spent the first 6-8 months in the north of the country trying to convince people to ship watermelons to the south. Now, they didn't know me from Adam. I was a complete stranger. I was this 25-year-old white guy who showed up and said, I have great ideas for how to run your life. Obviously, they were a little suspicious and a little bit, they didn't exactly rush out to welcome my advice. But after about 6 months, I got to know enough of them well enough that they started, right, having honest conversations with me. And Clementine, Tina Campour, one of my good friends while I was there, and an amazingly entrepreneurial woman, took me to one side over a beer and said, look, do you think we don't know that watermelons sell for a lot more in the South? Do you think we're idiots? And I said, well, no, I've been here 6 months. You're a bright, competent human being. Of course I don't. I said, well, look, we all know this. We've tried it. It turns out the roads are crap. The gendarmes and the police require a certain number of bribes. There's enough spoilage and theft and damage. that by the time these watermelons get to the South, we just cover our costs. We just make enough for it to make sense, and many people don't make, right? If we were to send more watermelons south, it's not a profitable venture. Now, of course, we were speaking French, and we also were not talking in terms of economics, and so when she was saying profitable, she was sort of saying, look, this is, but Tina was smart enough, she had enough different businesses going that she implicitly was sort of using the economic profit argument, because she could be using her capital for other things, and so she was sort of implicitly making a comparison between shipping watermelons and her other businesses. And so it turns out that while there were price differentials between the North and the South, everybody knew about them. And so you weren't going to be able to make positive economic profit by trading in or betting on something that everybody else knows. So, but if you have a vision that other people don't, arbitrage, either across space or speculation and arbitrage across time, assuming we have decent property rights and prices actually communicate meaningful information, which are some big assumptions. But if you know something that other people don't, you can make positive economic profit. Of course, what happens next? Now, before we get to the what happens next question, arbitrage and entrepreneurship are going to integrate local markets into national markets. We're going to have innovation with new products and new ways of organizing things. Find my notes here. Right? You think about Ray Kroc and McDonald's. I'll just make a note here about the what happens next question. We have iPods, we have iPhones, so we have innovation. Now what happens next if I continue to if I have stumbled upon something that is profitable, and I continue to make that positive $125? Well, as we've already mentioned, I'm standing here with a big sign over my head saying, come over here and copy me. And so other people are going to come over and copy me. And what are they going to do? They're going to produce their own guides. And when they produce their own guides, what's going to happen? The quantity of guides is going to go up, and in order to sell those guides, the price is going to have to come down. We're going to have competition. We're also going to have coordination and cooperation. Now, we're going to zoom in on this whole exactly how this works and model this a little bit more with something called the theory of the firm. But hold on to that for a little bit. The key at this point is, as maybe somebody else enters and you both are good, what happens? The sign over my head gets a little smaller. It's not quite as big. It's not $125. Maybe it's only $25. And I say, doggone it, I was making $125 in positive economic profit, and now I'm only making $25 in positive economic profit. I'm going to quit and go do something else. Right? Oh, no, of course not. You're still making positive economic profit. You and the new entrant are making $25 each. Now, you wish, of course, that they hadn't entered, but you're still making positive economic profit, and so are they. So what happens next? Somebody else sees this sign and imitates, and they enter until what point? We would expect people to enter until economic profit goes to zero. Because once economic profit hits zero, nobody has an incentive to enter and nobody has an incentive to leave. Now in the real world, this is of course a very dynamic process, just like the establishment of price and quantity, right? We've treated that as a static thing, but it's really not. So we can have innovation, the first mover who sees something. You can also have entrepreneurial imitation, somebody who is alert to the fact that somebody is doing something more effectively. You think about how long it took. Now, most of you are probably too young, maybe not, to remember the first iPhone. But when the iPhone came out, it was a huge hit. But the critics said, this is junk. It doesn't have a keyboard. You can't, right? BlackBerries at the time, people could really type quite quickly. And people said, this is crap. This isn't going to succeed. But it was going gangbusters, and Apple was setting aside a lot of money off this. Of course, what happened next? Well, you had the Samsung Galaxy, you had, right? Eventually, you have an almost infinite number of different touchscreen, iPhone-like devices. So you had Steve Jobs and the folks at Apple innovating, and then you had a lot of other people imitating. Now, I'm not saying Apple is necessarily the most innovative. Technologically, I think Apple, as I've already mentioned, is one of the most innovative when it comes to contracts. I think that's the main innovation that they've engaged in. Right? Samsung has a foldable screen that's been incorporated into their phones, which is, I think that sounds pretty neat. Anyways, but the key here is innovation, imitation. When economic profit goes to zero, this doesn't mean that the people in the market are losing money. They're almost certainly still making positive accounting profit, but they're making zero economic profit. So one of the things here, and I'll leave you with this today, this will be as far as we go, but basically say, right, as you hopefully realize, if you think back to where you get your breakfast from, and now in this day and age you think about where your toilet paper comes from and where your hand sanitizer comes from, our society depends on signals. It depends on information and rewards for using resources well. So we need to get that information out there, and we need to reward people for using resources well. We also need signals and punishment for using resources poorly. That's why the economic definition of profits is important. It lets us know how well resources are being used. So, that's pretty much profit. It's an important distinction between accounting profit, and we as economists expect that in a competitive market without barriers to entry, economic profit goes to zero. And entrepreneurs are upset that they can't continue to make positive economic profit, but we as a society are better off as a result of economic profit going to zero, not as a result of taking away economic profit. This is not an argument for taxing away profit. If we were to tax away profit, what would happen? If we said, if you make positive economic profit, we're going to take it from you. Again, people would have the information that their vision generates value, but they would not have an incentive to act on that information. So, so what I'm talking about is that profit gets competed away, not taxed or legislated away. These are two very different ways of having economic profit go to zero. We could say, and some presidential candidates have said, what we should do is just have 100% tax profit on corporations, these big corporations, or maybe it's these big entrepreneurs or these these billionaires. It's crazy that they are making all this money. And I say, actually, it's crazy that they're not making more. Right? You think about the value that Bill Gates created in the world. By having his vision and acting on it, he got a very small portion of the value he created for society. Same thing with Steve Jobs, same thing with Henry Ford. I actually think, right, this is how we get new products, this is how we get our needs met. I actually think that profit is right, we know that it is far less than the value that these people are generating. And how do we know that? Because we know that when this quantity is sold and at this price, this is the total benefit that is being generated, and this is the total revenue that is being collected, and this right here is the profit. Profit is a very small share of the value that entrepreneurs generate. So hopefully I've convinced you both that entrepreneurship is, and entrepreneurs are, important for social coordination and cooperation, but also that economic profit is important. And understanding that distinction between economic and accounting profit is important. Again, we'll get some practical tools as to how to incorporate this maybe a little bit into our models. I think we will, in a more dynamic, meaningful way than just having them hanging off our supply schedule. But the key for today is to understand what profit is, and then also understand how it functions in terms of rewarding value creation and punishes value destruction.